cards and the globe and all this other stuff. Oh my God, I could stay there all day. I used to love this stuff. And so I'm with you. But yes, please.
Yeah. Yeah, books were my salvation when I was a kid. And I think that's probably why writing came to me. Like I didn't have to study story structure because I read so voraciously when I was a kid that I just knew what needed to be in a story. But like I was saying, I was born into a very poor family. So at the age of 5, we moved from the trailer park to a small property like way out in the boonies. And we had some animals. I think we were about 45 minutes outside of the nearest town. So we would drive into town to dumpster dive, looking for produce that had been thrown away to feed our animals. But a lot of the time, we ended up eating the food as well. So I literally grew up eating out of garbage cans. And I started working when I was 11 years old after my father left. He abandoned us. So, yeah, I needed to work to buy my own clothing, to help my mom with household expenses. And in order for her to support us, to put a roof over our head, she started a group home for delinquent teenagers. So these 16, 17-year-old teenagers were living in my home, and they were the worst of the worst, the kids that couldn't be placed in regular foster care because nobody would take them because they'd like burned down their schools, they'd tried to kill people. So these are the kinds of people that were living in my home, and that's how I grew up. So it was very traumatic. And then when I went to college, I put myself through completely debt-free by working 3 jobs. So school was not like the typical college experience that was a lot of fun. I didn't have a whole lot of fun in college. And when I finished, I just couldn't do it anymore. I was intending to go to law school. I've always been very smart, so I had a 4.0 even while working 3 jobs. But I could not face doing that for another 3 years. So I decided to join the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and that took, I think, it was like a 3-year span when I first applied to when I was actually going to go in. And during that time, I was a firefighter at a ski resort, and I was sexually assaulted by my boss. And when I pressed charges, he had a lot of connections in the RCMP. And so when the RCMP found out, they basically victim blamed me and told me that I was no longer a candidate for the police force. So my entire life just completely fell apart. I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. And I packed up my cats and whatever I could fit into my car, and I drove from Canada to Seattle. And I couldn't work for a year when I got here, trying to figure out so I was an illegal immigrant, basically. Yeah, so just trying to figure out how to get citizenship or a green card. So I did manage to do that within a year. But once I was here, I had lost all my motivation to try to do anything really. So I worked in restaurants pretty much my whole life with no big goals. I just wanted to survive. And I stuffed all of my trauma. I put on a brave, I put on a brave face. Nobody knew that I was struggling. I pretended like I wasn't struggling. And then in 2018, I did not want to be here anymore. Everything was bubbling to the surface. I was in a really unhealthy relationship, and that was kind of the catalyst for me getting help. I recognized that the person I was, the person I was being in the world, was not true to myself, and I needed help. And I'd had therapy in the past. I'd done EMDR, I'd taken the antidepressants, I'd been in therapy, and nothing had helped me. And I had heard about psychedelic-assisted therapy, and I knew that it was illegal, and I knew that it was really hard to find a therapist because it's illegal. So I went to a plant medicine meetup and I started talking to people there. And I met somebody who had treatment resistant depression who was working with a psychedelic therapist. And he referred me to his therapist. But that person couldn't get me in for 6 months because, there were so few therapists doing that he just couldn't get me in. And I was like, well, I'm probably not going to be around in 6 months. So he was training other therapists at the time, and he referred me to one of his trainees, and she got me right in, and she saved my life. And the rest, I guess you could say, is history. She put me into a group of women who would journey together a couple times a year. And a few of us have sort of formed our own group out of that. And most of the people in my inner circle now are psychedelic therapists. So we journey together three or four times a year as our own therapy. So we talk after each session with each other and integrate that way.
So here's something to unpack is when you left Canada, when you lost your job, when you were basically robbed of everything, you're the person you are and by your employer. But yet you were still this amazingly strong person. I mean, you still prevailed to get a US citizenship, which we laughed when you mentioned it, but it's never been easier. Granted, it's
No.
never been harder, but it's never been easy. But you still prevailed to do that. And then you search for solutions. So that makes you an incredibly strong person. And like you said, you're this incredibly smart person. And those solutions were ones you were able to find because it takes a lot of ability to research and determine what's right and wrong, right? And
Yeah.
so, and then the psychedelic therapy really changed you. So where I'm landing at here is there's a lot of people that have a lot of ability, but are just kicked to the side and they don't have any sort of assistance that would, and we've made it all illegal. Like you said, psychedelic therapy still till today is illegal. And there was a reason for that, right? And I think you said, and Kevin said, I think it started with the Nixon administration, right? Where there was the protesters were hippies and they were doing these drugs, right? So you've got this powerful president that wants his way and he's going to do anything to hamstring and to create his own narrative, right? So jump right into that too before, and then Kevin might have some stuff to put out there.
Yeah, Kevin, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, well, it is, and totally unrelated to your story, which, by the way, Diana, my gosh, I mean, I'm still processing, but it's so impactful to hear your story. And I definitely echo Coach's comments in terms of your intestinal fortitude to go through that process. I understand, and you are open and candid about the fact that you had come to the place where you just didn't want to live anymore. So it finally had gotten you to that point. But nonetheless, you were seeking an option and you only got to that point because no options had appeared up to that point, And so as it relates to the history of psychedelics and the extent to which they can be therapeutic, they can have medicinal benefit, right? Yeah, it's a tragic history because as we were going through the 60s, right, they were discovered by the counterculture, the younger generation, and were a part of a broader movement where Americans in general were basically holding power to account for choices that power intended to make. One of them was this idea that we were going to the military industrial complex, we were doing foreign policy through the military, and we were engaged in this escalating war in Vietnam. And the young adults, yes, from the counterculture community, right, who were also engaged in a variety of drugs, but certainly psychedelics, psychedelics were identified with them because this was part of their community. But yes, it was kind of a knee-jerk thing in order to regain control of the American people to Nixon's launch on the war on drugs. Right. This was a major way to control youth, is to take these drugs away from them so that they could be properly indoctrinated into conventional American value structures and all this other stuff. Okay. And so swept up in that broader fabric was we buried psychedelics. We incorporated it with other drugs, many of which, like heroin, much more dangerous, no known therapeutic benefit, right? And once those things were labeled in the early 70s this way, we lost like 40 years the capacity for research to be done to differentiate cocaine, heroin from mushrooms and other psychedelics in order to say, what do we have here? To what extent can these things be beneficial? And it cost us. And so as you were coming through your journey, it became a solution. But could you speak to a moment, Diana, about given what you discovered and what through this therapy, psychedelic therapy, could you imagine how many people could have been helped and were denied the help and are still
Yeah.
being denied the help because of how we categorize the therapy, this range, the psychedelic range of drugs?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at our homeless population, which has just absolutely ballooned in the last even decade, if you look at that population, there's a huge portion of them who are war veterans, and there's a huge population of them who are addicts. So, war vets, a lot of them have PTSD, and then obviously addicts are addicted. And those two things are the two things that psychedelic therapy have been shown to help, like more than any other treatment available. Psychedelics help those two things. So our entire society would benefit and change once this is legalized. But there's also the worry that I have that once it is legalized, it's just going to be so expensive that the people who really need it are not going to be able to get it. That's my biggest concern. And that's also part of the reason I trained as a facilitator, because I know personally how expensive it was. And I want to be the kind of person who offers it at a price point where the people who need it the most can get it. I'm hopeful that this country will pull its head out of its ass at some point. But with recent events, I don't know. My hope is dwindling for this country at the moment. But yeah.
So
I certainly echo your concern, Diana, about the affordability issue, because we, sadly enough, over that same period of time, since the 70s, we have experienced what more and more people are coming to call late stage capitalism. And by late stage capitalism is that how capitalism is functioning is moving further and further out of the optimal zone and more into the extreme. And one of the things when you look at the standard business model, it involves profit seeking, for-profit operations, which is at the heart of capitalism, right? One of the things that have progressively become apparent is that the revenue growth that used to drive shared prosperity has progressively diminished. And how money is now progressively been made is by cutting cost. So you're not getting 5 to 10% revenue growth every year over year like you used to, and then all boats are getting lifted, right? Now revenue is basically flat, 1 to 2%. You're reducing costs through technology gains, through taking the jobs and finding the cheapest labor around the world, through technology, automation, artificial intelligence, all of these things basically leaving the American labor force with less and less high quality jobs to do. Okay. That worked for a while. And then they shifted into, okay, now we're going to focus in on the things we must have. We must have. And so where once in the United States, all the essential things were not extremely expensive. Food was not extremely expensive. Housing was not extremely expensive. Medicine was not extremely expensive. Right. Vaccines were not extremely expensive. Okay. That's how it was in 50s to 60s to 70s. Right. Okay. Right now, everything that you essentially have to have is extremely expensive. Right. And so you are absolutely right. The tragedy of how people are making their money these days is they take the things we absolutely have and then they shake us down for every dollar they can to squeeze out of us. And that's why so many of us are being left behind. Right. And so, yeah, I'm with you. And the only way to turn that tide is for most of us I say the 99% to come together. The only people that benefits is the owners, the 1%. And it's not even the most of the 1%. It's the